Hi, my name is Emily Lash, and I will be sharing my presentation on the second wave of women's movements. These times were very trying but very influential in our history, so this is an important topic to share. I gathered my information from 3 scholarly sources as well as outside information talked about in our course textbook and other online sources. I hope you enjoy this presentation. To understand the second wave of women's movements, we must begin by talking about the first. The first wave took place in the late 19th and early 20th century. The first wave was mainly concerned with women's rights to vote. As many know, looking back on our history, women and people of color were not seen as equals. Tara Aned shares in her article that politics and business were completely dominated by powerful men who didn't consider women capable enough to be a threat. Women were expected to stay at home under control of their husbands. During these times, women had no basic rights and could not even file for divorce, be granted custody of her children, or even be respected enough to enter the workforce outside of her home. Discriminations were placed on too many people, and through such times they had to stand up for themselves to make a difference. The first wave was connected with the abolitionist movement in the United States at the time. Both movements aimed at social reformation and liberation from oppression. A famous group of women formed the National American Women's Suffrage Association to bring women together and let it be known that their voices should be heard. Through hard times and lots of battles, the first wave of women's movements ended with the 19th Amendment being passed. Ratified on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote. While it seems like the goal had been achieved, the struggle was not over for women or for people of color. They continued to be discriminated against and not treated as equals, causing even more division in a country that claimed they were united. At the start of World War I in 1914, large numbers of women were recruited into jobs that were vacated by men who had gone to fight in the war. Finally, women were working in jobs outside of the kitchen. According to Patricia Farah in the article Women in Science, A Temporary Liberation, many women were recruited into analytical chemistry because they were deemed to be well suited to following routine recipes, but they were paid at around 2/3 of the men's rate for hazardous work. The world made it seem like they were giving women such great opportunities, but in reality, there should never have been a deadline to when these opportunities were granted. Women should have been able to enter the workforce regardless of whether men were away in the war or not. Furthermore, they should have been paid the same amount as men, with no discriminations questioning their worth. This clearly caused division once again, since women were still not being seen as equals. This was the start of the second wave of women's movements. Different from the first, the second wave of women's movements touched on even more aspects of women's experience. This included politics, work, family, and sexuality. Women were fighting just as hard as they did in the first movement to gain respect. In her article, Revisioning the Women's Liberation Movement's Narrative, early second wave African American feminist Rosalind Baxandall talks about what these movements were like. She shares that membership in the women's liberation movement was informal and most individuals participated by attending events, conscience-raising groups, and demonstrations rather than general business meetings. An important slogan women used in these times was "Personal is political." It was a common belief among feminists that the personal experiences of women were rooted in their political situation and gender inequality. They were being discriminated in their personal lives by political power just for the fact that they were a woman. Susan Marguerite speaks up in her article Women's Liberation Was a Movement, Not an Organization, when she says, "The personal is political. Housework is political. Abortion is political. Standards of feminine beauty are political. Women's oppression is political. Sexual satisfaction is political. A reevaluation of male-female relations is political. What else are we on the verge of discovering? What other so-called trivial issues and private battles consigned to the personal will we bring to light and define as political?" This is a powerful quote because it brings light to how poorly women were treated and how such personal matters did not need to be brought to a political platform. Second wave women's movements continued, and after the war, it was almost universally assumed that female workers should give up their jobs and slip back into their previous roles as wives and mothers, says Patricia Farah in her scholarly article. These hard times went on for much too long, and today we are still enduring some of the same discriminations on people who are seen as different. Today, the role of women in the United States has changed dramatically over the past few decades. For one, more and more women have taken on new responsibilities outside the home by joining the paid workforce. This is clearly something we can be proud of, but like I said, people who are different are still discriminated against. Anna Chu and Charles Posner share a statistic that proves this point. Although an increasing number of women are either the sole breadwinner for their family or share the roles with their partners, women in the United States are paid only 77 cents for every dollar a man makes. The pay gap is even larger for women of color. On average, African American women make 64 cents for every dollar that white men make. In a world where everyone wants unity, it is sad that there is so much division. We have come a long way, and the second wave of women's movements prove this. We still have a long way to go, but in the future we could see even more changes being made, and you could be a part of them. Remember to hold our nation's name true and stay united rather than divided. We can thank people throughout our history that got us to this point, and now it is our jobs to continue the journey. Thank you for listening.